Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, today's video, not quite about rides, it's more about those JOBs that we all try to get working on rides. One of the questions I get all the time is, how do you get good at what you do? So, I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none, you probably know that phrase. And I wanted to talk about learning on the fly today, so let's get into that.
Now get ready. Here we go.
If this is your first time here, make sure you like, subscribe, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out and I do appreciate it. Okay, for today's video, I got an email and they wanted to ask about how do you get good at learning on the fly? Now, a lot of people contact me on this channel about getting jobs, working on rides, working at amusement parks, all that sort of stuff. And they always ask, they say, what type of schooling do I need? What type of background do I need? What type of this? What type of that? I've made a bunch of videos actually on getting jobs at amusement parks. This is not a video about getting a job at an amusement park. This is a video about using your skills to your best ability. Now, one of the things that I did as a mechanic early on is I stopped asking questions and just accepting the answer. Whatever that answer was, it was like, oh, because of this, like a lot of people I found in the department, a lot of people would get that answer and they would just go, okay, and they were done with it. But I wanted to know why. Why was that? I always ask that question, why? Why is that way? Just to find out that most mechanics, they had the answer, but they didn't know why that answer was the answer. So in turn, they didn't know if that was the right answer or not. So one of the first steps of learning on the fly is simply just building your knowledge up and building your experience with what you are working with. It doesn't matter what you're working with right now. Dig into that subject, figure it out. This will require homework. You will have to go do some homework on your own and try to get some of the background of what you're working with. It will ask you'll make some enemies doing this too, because people inherently don't like to be questioned. They don't like that answer. Like when they say, oh, it's because of this, and then you say why, a lot of people interpret that as a slap in the face. They do not want to be questioned when they say this is the answer. They just want to say, well, that's the answer and we're done with it. But a big part of learning is not necessarily rejecting the answer, but it's understanding why that answer is that. So a lot of that time, you don't have the background knowledge to stand on. So it's like, okay, you're going to have to do some of that homework in the background to go get that knowledge. And this can be applied, I worked on lots of mechanical stuff, but this can be applied to almost anything in life. You're going to have to do some homework if you want to accelerate at whatever it is you're doing. I started out a long time ago, and I wanted to race go-karts. So in trying to figure out racing go-karts, I didn't know how to go about doing that. So I asked my dad if we can get a racing go-kart. And he says, well, why don't you try to figure out how to build a go-kart? So it was like, okay. So I went and started to learn how to fabricate things, how to get steel, how to weld steel together and stuff like that. During that process of doing that, I figured out, as I was also getting older during this process, I figured out, you know what, with all my skills putting them together, it wasn't going to take much to just jump up into some lightweight stock car racing. So I'm like, well, I want to build stock cars. So when I did that, I said, I went to my parents and I said, I want to build a stock car. My parents knew nothing about cars. They didn't know how to work on them, how to fix them. They definitely didn't know how to build them. So they always encouraging. They said, well, you do what you want to do. We'll support you. So I got a job, I saved up money, and I bought a car. And I said, well, it wasn't a running car, it was a car out of a junkyard. So then the question became, well, I want to get this running. Well, how do I get this running? It's like, well, you're going to have to figure out how to work on an engine. And it's like, well, the engine doesn't work. How do I get that? It's like, well, you got to figure out how to work on electrical. And so in doing all these things and getting all this experience, I just gradually started nibbling away at these little pieces. I had machinery working, I had welding, and then pretty soon I had basic electrical. Now, you can't really get much more basic than DC wiring in a car. Now, cars these days, they're way more sensor driven. It's a lot more complicated these days. But in the older days, I was working with cars from the 70s. They were very, very simple. You know, they just had your 12 volts going all over everything. They had relays to engage a starter. So I learned what a starter relay is. It's like, well, that's, you give it a little bit of voltage and it connects your big voltage. You could take a little tiny switch and tell that relay to turn on and let 700 amps through to the starter. It's like, okay, so I started grasping that concept. A big thing when you're learning is trying to make analogies with stuff. It's one of the reasons why I feel like I'm good at doing a lot of these YouTube videos, is because I don't try to explain things to people the way I understand them. I try to make analogies to things that people, basic people just tuning in for the first time, can look at and say, oh yeah, I understand that. That's one of the reasons why I often make responses and I go back to working on cars. I go back to driving cars. I go back to working on a lawnmower. I go back to doing things around the house, because for a lot of us, we can relate to those things. Now, I could sit here and tell you the exact specifics about how a relay works internally and get into theory of AC and DC wiring and all that stuff, but for the majority of us out there, that doesn't mean anything at all to us. It's like, how does a relay work? Well, a relay is essentially a light switch, just like you have in your home. So think about using a light switch. You go over, the light is off. You push the button, it allows electricity to go through to the light, and the light turns on. Kind of like a relay, but instead of you pushing that switch to turn it on, we're going to use another switch to turn that switch on. And you know, you just have to keep trying to figure out that best way to relate to something. When you could take a topic you don't understand much about and relate to components on the inside of it, you can start to digest that topic a little bit better, and you can start to get into it and say, okay, all right, I understand this now, but I don't understand that. And you can get the theory of that second component, but you don't understand why that second component is that way until you could figure out something and go, oh, that works like this thing over here. It's like, oh, okay. So if this works like that, then I can make that analogy and say that is in that component. And then when that doesn't work, I can say like, it's because this thing didn't do what I needed it to do. So making analogies is a very strong thing. It's a strong aspect of learning. You can sit there and say, all right, like if I can relate to this, if I can relate to that, and I could figure something else out, you can not only digest a topic yourself, but you can also teach that topic now to somebody else, because you're now understanding the basics and principles of it. For mechanics, one of the things I always say is jump on to your basics. No one's ever really above the basics. So many rides, so many pieces of equipment are built in different languages, different countries, different standards and everything else. You can always take electrical diagrams and work through those electrical diagrams. Go to something that's complicated that you don't understand and try to make sense of it. I cut my teeth basically working on an SLC that was all relay logic driven. The whole thing was relay logic, just hundreds of relays clicking in and out. And I said one day, I was like, you know, when we dispatch the train, it goes onto the lift hill, but it only goes about halfway out of the station, and then all the booster motors turn off. So I would give myself little challenges to work on while I was at work. I would set aside some time each day and go through the manual and start looking at wiring diagrams, trying to figure it out. And I would say, okay, I know those booster wheels turn off. It's like they turn off because the contactor drops out. Why does that contactor drop out? Well, that contactor drops out because the relay drops out. Well, what causes that relay to drop out? It's always why. Okay, this stopped. Why? Because of that. Why? Because of that. Why? And I just keep asking the question back and back until eventually, in my head, I've built the entire circuit sitting there. Now, you're able to go through and say, okay, well, this relay is to those things over there, and that relay is to those things over there. So then sometimes watching the equipment helps. It's like, all right, so I know all this, so I could sit there and just watch these relays click in and out, in and out, in and out. And I can start to understand what the machinery is trying to do. One of the key concepts that a lot of people get wrong is they don't try to figure out, they don't try to think what the machine is doing. Any form of troubleshooting you're doing, the number one thing you should be asking yourself, I don't care if it's a roller coaster, if it's a lawnmower, if it's a dishwasher, you should be asking yourself, what is this trying to do right now? Okay, a simple thing. You dispatch a ride, it goes up the lift hill, it stops at Lift Park. Okay, the ride is now stopped at the top of the lift hill. Why? Why is it stopped at the top of the lift? Well, you could say right there, well, I don't know. But if you step out of that mindset and say, what is the machine trying to do? You say, well, it's trying to send the train forward, but it won't let it. It's like, okay, how does that work? It's like, well, it goes up to the top, and then once it reaches the top, it basically has to ask for permission to go forward into the next block zone. It's like, okay, but something was wrong. Yeah, something was wrong. So what happened? It went up to the top. Why does it always go to that point right there? Because that's where a proximity sensor is. And when that proximity sensor gets triggered, that one says, hey, I'm going to start looking at this logic in front of me. And that logic in front of me says, is the block in front of me safe to enter into? And that logic was false. That was a no. It's not safe. So it's like, okay, all right, so if it goes up to the top and it catches that proximity sensor, and then it says, is it safe to go in front? And it says no. Now you understand what the machine's doing. It's like, all right, it stopped it right there at the top because it was not safe to proceed. So now you have to go to the next step, and you have to go to the next why. Why was it not safe to proceed? It's like, well, and this is where it starts getting complicated, because of these avenues, you start getting into 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 different avenues to go down to really quick. But realistically, rides are really simple. It's like, are your brakes working? Is the block free? Those are like your two things. Do the brakes work, and is the block free? Can you stop? Is a train in front of you? So a lot of times what the answer was that it said, well, the brakes are working just fine because it had all of its pressure sensors are okay out there, and the air pressure okay relay was pulled in, but the ride thought it had a train in front of it. I went to look for the ride's block relay logic, and I would see down there they would use these maintained relays, which means a normal relay it's off. When you energize it, it turns on. Maintained relays are mechanical safeties, so they are, let's say, in a closed state, and then you energize a coil and they change to an open state, and they stay that way. And then you have to energize the other coil and it changes back to a closed state. Now, they're a little bit more complicated than that. They're actually two sets of mechanical relays on the insides with a selector switch between the two so they can't both function at the same time. And then they're both open at the same time. So when you say, I'm going to go to one, it latches shut. And then when I want to go to the other one, it mechanically unlatches the first one, latches the second one, and prevents the two from being latched at the same time. So now downstairs, I'm in the control room and I'm looking at the block logic, and I see that the lift hill is occupied, and then I look over and I see that the second block, or the run track, is occupied as well. And I go, oh, okay, it thinks there's a train there. So then I can check that in the control room real quick and see what's going on. I say, all right, it thinks there's a train there. And I go up to the top and I go, where's the two trains at? Oh, one's up at the top of the lift hill. It's like, yeah, I got that one. Where's the other one? It's right here in the station. Okay. We're only running 2 trains on this ride, so it's truly a ghost train. It's like, all right. So you can go to the block system now and do a reset. You put your keys in, typically hit the E-stop, you hit the reset, and then the block system resets, and then you turn the ride back on. Now, if the train starts up and is able to go back over, your blocks reset just fine, no big deal. If you hit that reset and that block, that run track block occupies again, why? Why did that occupy again? I just told the block to reset, but now it's occupied again. Why is that? It's like, well, there's a handful of sensors in the run track. They start at the very top of the lift. There's a couple at the very top of the lift, and then the rest of them are in the brakes down at the bottom, or in the next block section, depending on the ride's layout, whatever it is, not a big deal. So when one of those proximity sensors trigger, when any one of those proximity sensors trigger, it says my block is occupied. And it's a safety thing. It doesn't matter how many of them trigger, any one of them can trigger to create a ghost train in that block. Okay? So it's like, all right, so then I can go through all those proximity sensors. Now, I should see them on both ends. I should see the one side of the proximity sensor that's normally off should be off. The one side of the proximity sensor that's normally on should be on. So for each one, I could look at it and say off, on, off, on. I go all the way down until I go to one proximity sensor, and I go, look at this one. If you're actually looking at the proximity sensor, a lot of times like the Pepperfuge proximity sensors have like a green light for power and an orange light for signal. So it'd be like green, and then as something passes in front of it, it turns orange, and then it continues to go by. So you get down to one proximity sensor, and it's got an orange light on it. And it's like, this one thinks something is in front of it. A lot of the times I do have to say it's not that simple. Most of the time what happens is those sensors break internally. So you'll see the green light on the front, no orange light on any of them. But in the control room, when you go look at the inputs, you'll see off, on, off, on, off, on, and then you'll get to that one sensor, and the one that's supposed to be off is on, and the other one that's supposed to be on is also on. It's conflict in signals. But because that one sensor gave out that one false signal, it occupied that run track block. And because it occupied that block, it stopped the train at the top of the lift hill, which shut the ride down. So this is a ride call where you go out there and you go, okay, now you might have the ability to reset that block, and depending on your logic, you might be able to force the train over because the rest of the block is in fact empty. You might be able to do that, or this might be one of those scenarios depending on how the ride is set up and programmed, depending on the park's rules and all that sort of stuff. This is where you'd have to evacuate a ride at the top of the lift hill and say, okay, you have to come down because we got to dig into the electrical system. It's like, okay, so they do that. So we get those people off, get them back down, and you go, okay, I lock the ride out. I go out there with my brand new proximity sensor. I undo the typically 3 screws holding the thing on newer models. It's just like a DIN cord with little 4 prongs on there. Unscrew that guy, plug it back in, put my new one on, go back, take the lockout off the ride, turn it on, go to do my block reset. That block is still occupied. What? How is that even possible? I go back down to the control room and I look at my inputs again, and that exact same proximity sensor has the dual readings on it again. I was like, what the heck? How is this even possible? So I asked the question again, why? Okay, I found the problem. I said it's a proximity sensor, and I replaced it. But the ride still thinks it's got that dual signal on there, which it shouldn't have. So the next question is, of course, why? Always ask why. It's like, okay, so then we go back, and then you have to start chasing wires at that point. I'm going to go back to that proximity sensor, and I'm going to go, well, how would it get the signal that it's both high and low, even with a new proximity sensor on there? It's like, well, when it's not the proximity sensor. Well, what's that lowered down to? It's either wiring or the PLC input. PLC inputs rarely ever just go bad and just flag high like that. It's possible, but not very likely, and that's all my experience talking there. So it's like, all right, so you start chasing out wiring, and you start pulling wiring, and you're chasing those wires back to the junction box, and it goes in the junction box. You open up the junction box. Everything looks fine and clean. You check the wiring connectors in there. Yep, everything's fine. And then you're going down, and you chase those wires, and you're going around a spot, and then you're pulling that cable to the next area, and that cable goes around a cable tray that's got a sharp 90-degree bend in it. And right where that cable goes around that 90-degree bend, it's on that sharp edge. You pull it away, and you could see that it's cut through that cable. And you go, that is it right there. Look at that. Between the junction boxes, between those 2 junction boxes, that cable was sitting there over time and just rubbed its way through on that corner, and now it was shorting wires internally, where it was taking power and putting it on the return channel back to the PLC. It's like, very interesting. That probably ground out and caused a circuit breaker or a fuse to blow normally. But it's the process of always asking why. Why? Don't go past your basics. Don't pass up that opportunity. If you don't understand wiring, find a wiring person, find a electrical person to explain the wiring to you, right? Especially someone at the park or at whatever field you're in. Take a wiring diagram to a piece of machinery or whatever you're working with and ask someone who knows what they're doing to explain some stuff to you. I've done it plenty of times myself. I did not start out a controls person. I started out a mechanic, but I kept asking the controls guy, well, what does this symbol mean? What's this symbol mean? What does that do? What's this do? And I have very knowledgeable guys that would just, oh, this is what this means. This is how that works. This is the reason why that stuff works. So they would explain it to me. And again, I would always try to relate that to something that I already knew to make sure my fundamental building blocks were correct. And when I went and did troubleshooting, everything was correct. One of the worst ones, one of the hardest ones is hydraulics, because hydraulics you can't really troubleshoot that well if you don't have some really good specialized tools and equipment sitting around because of the extreme pressure that's in those lines. You can't just say, oh, let's push this valve and see what it does. It doesn't work that way. You can cause some serious damage, explode lines and stuff like that, and possibly injure somebody. So you can't really mess around with hydraulics much, and it's all inside big steel components. It's wrapped up in there. You can't really tell what the system is doing. So that's one of the hardest things I've ever troubleshoot is hydraulic systems. They are very tricky to work on, especially when you said it's not only like electricity where it's either there or it's not there. Now hydraulics have flow to them. It's like, is the valve on? Yes. Is it going? Yes. But it's like, do you have enough flow going through the system? It's like, well, we got nothing to measure flow. How do you know it's not bypassing internally? It's like, well, I got nothing to see if it's bypassing internally. It's like, I've done a lot of guesswork inside hydraulic systems myself. So all these things that I'm saying are going back to the key features of learning on the fly. Again, it's all these things that I've been talking about, asking why, relating things to other subjects, trying to understand the basics of what you're working with. That stuff allows you to walk up to machinery quickly and then troubleshoot. My brother was working for an equipment repair company, and he would call me up from time to time and say, hey, this piece of equipment is doing this. And I would go, okay. So I knew nothing about his business. Like, he worked on a different type of industrial machinery completely. So I knew nothing about his business. That was his stuff. I never got into that. I didn't know anything about it. But he would say, hey, I'm having a lot of trouble with this piece of equipment. It's really driving me crazy, and I can't figure it out. So he would call me up because I've perfected this process, and I'm really good at it. He would say, okay, I'm trying to do this, but it's not doing that. And I'd start with, okay, what's the machine trying to do? And he says, we load it up like this, we do this, and then this other process starts after that. And I'm like, okay, is there a lid on it? It's like, yeah, once they load it inside, they got to pull the lid shut on the thing. It's like, all right, I would venture to say that there's probably 2 limit switches on that lid, because you typically want to safety something that big. So you probably put 2 limit switches on there, and I'm guessing the signal of those switches missing is probably preventing the machine from operating. And I remember something like that, and several times it's been like, oh, yep, that was the problem. Like, there was a short in the wiring, or there was a wire that broke or something internally inside there. It's like, yep, found it. So I was able to effectively troubleshoot equipment over the phone on something that I knew nothing about. I mean, it wasn't even there looking at it, but I had an experienced person telling me what the machinery is supposed to do. Start with what it's supposed to do, and then you say what it is doing, and then you just run down the tree of asking why it's doing what it's doing until you arrive at the problem. So cause and effect, kind of. This hasn't been just me. It's like I've done this lots of times. I've done this with other people. I've done this with other parks. So I've been out of business here now for 6 going on 7 years, and the number of amusement parks that have contacted me looking for help on their rides has actually been really interesting. I've gotten a handful of emails from amusement parks that are looking for help on rides. They're like, it's doing this, and we don't understand why it's doing this. So it's like, okay, so I would sit there and go email back and forth a couple of times and say, okay, what's it supposed to be doing? What is it doing? And then not knowing the ride that they're talking about, although they'd say what the ride is, and I could look at, like videos on YouTube and stuff like that, but not really understanding the ride, I would ask them the same exact questions. It's like, okay, what's it supposed to be doing? What is it doing? And then I run down the tree of why it would do that. The whole process is, again, going back to me putting myself in place of the machinery. I try to think like the machinery. What is the machinery trying to do? It's trying to do this process, but it can't. Why? Because there's a safety in there that's keeping it from that. Who are we trying to keep safe? We're trying to keep the operator safe. So it's got some sort of optical feedback that knows where the operator is. It's like, oh, actually we use a foot pedal to know where the operator is. Does that foot pedal work? It's like, well, I mean, we can't get the thing to run, so how do we know if the foot pedal works? It's like, well, give it a false signal. Open up the foot pedal, and with no one there and nobody around, just jump the wire on the foot pedal and tell it that the pedal's down. So they open it up, jump the wire. It's like ride runs. It's like, hey, look at that. Your foot pedal's bad. Replace the foot pedal. Go on with your life. It's a great thing. So I really think it's quite an amazing thing when other parks reach out to me. I think it's kind of funny too. Just like, oh, what'd you do? It's like, we reached out to a guy on YouTube. Take it for what it's worth. But I've had lots of different companies and things like that reach out. I'm very flattered when it comes to that. Not to toot my own horn, you have to sometimes. I mean, don't be afraid in your industry to toot your own horn because nobody's going to do it for you. You have to be your best spokesperson for yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. No one else is there with you when you're doing that stuff. When I do troubleshooting, I want to do troubleshooting the way I think about it and not the way other people think about it. So here's a tip. If you want to troubleshoot things yourself. Don't rely on other people doing troubleshooting for you. I have gotten so many crews so pissed off and mad at me for doing this, but it is part of my process. Here's what's going on. The ride's down. It's been down for a long time. I've got a crew of 3 guys working out there. They can't figure out why the ride doesn't work. So they call me up because I'm the supervisor at the time. So they call me up to go down and troubleshoot the ride. It's like, okay. I say I need one person to come help me troubleshoot, and that's typically just because I need someone to go push buttons out of the control panel for me. All right. So I make my way down to the ride. And I said, okay, you guys have done good. Go back to the shop, do your paperwork, do your stuff like that. Take lunches, take breaks, whatever the time of day might be, And then I'll let you know if I get it running. And the guys, they'd be working on it, they're working on it for like 3 hours straight. And they're like, well, don't you want to know what we did? And no, I don't. Well, we've been working on it for 3 hours. I'm like, yeah, you have. And they're like, we can't get it running. I'm like, well, yeah, that's why I'm here. But you don't want to know what we did? No. Why not? This is where I'm a complete dick about this, right? And no easy way to say that. Like, I understand how this looks. They say, why don't you want to know? I said, because you guys couldn't figure it out. So that means your troubleshooting's bad. Go. And I'd piss them the F off and they would storm out of there. And I'd start back at the beginning. Okay, what's the ride not doing? It's not doing this. It's like, all right, well, so I get in there and I run a couple basic checks. All right, this thing is not going down. Why is this not going down? It's like, well, let's see. If I push the contactor in to make it go down, it doesn't go down. It's like, that means we're missing power somewhere. Go, right there. Circuit breaker. Tripped. Turn that guy back on. Start it now. It's like, yep, now it's working. It's like, okay. 3 guys down there for 3 hours. They could not figure it out. When I went back to the shop, like 45 minutes later after the equipment was back up and running, like, what was it? I'm like, tripped circuit breaker. It's like, we checked that. It's like, I don't know what to tell you because it was tripped. And they're like, yeah, but we checked that. We did this. And it's like, well, how did you do that? Well, we checked voltage here and here and here. And we had voltage. I'm like, did you actually go to the component and see if it was off? Well, no, but we had voltage there. It's like, okay, then voltage was backfeeding from something because I went to the component and it was off. But that was one of the things. That's why people didn't like me when I got into that sort of scenario. I was burnt so many times by asking other people what they did. And then they said, we did all this stuff. And I trusted them that their troubleshooting methods and their arriving at what they said, like, this is good, this is not good. I trusted that they were correct in their assumptions. So one of the big things that I always did when rides didn't work and I had to go figure it out myself is I stopped trusting them because I was burnt so many times by some of the basics that they got wrong. We checked the fuse. It's like, the fuse is blown. We checked that fuse. I'm like, did you take the fuse out of the holder to check it? Well, no, we checked it in there. It's like, you got voltage back feeding on it. Always remove a fuse from its holder when you want to check the thing. Don't check it inside the unit. I've been burnt so many times by that, I start over. I assume all the troubleshooting that's been done before me was incorrect and wrong. That's the reason why the equipment's not running. I've said this story before too. I went to our impulse coaster. I came back from vacation. It's been down for like a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been down for a week. So I came back from my long vacation and they're like, my boss told me, he's like, don't even check your emails and stuff. Just go straight down to that ride and start working with it. It's like, okay. So I went down to the ride. I didn't even read the turnovers from what all these guys were doing. I just didn't even read the turnovers. I just went down to the ride. I opened up the trouble log, which is where we recorded everything was done with those things. And I read the last trouble call, which was actually the one that started it, where it had the ride downtime but never showed it going back up and running. The one where it's been down for like a week and a half now. So I go down to that ride, I open up that log, and it says, this is what happened, and this is what the ride said was going on. Okay, so I went right to the unit where they said what was happening. I opened up that unit. I did some checks on the inside of it. And I was like, oh yeah, this unit's bad. We took it down, went over and grabbed another one because once they started dealing with these things, it was like playing musical seats with all these sensors that were on the ride. So I grabbed another one. I addressed it real quick and did some checks on it. I put it up in there, tightened it down, connected the fiber optic loop back together on the thing. There we go. The ride's up and running. It's like, well, what'd you do? It's like, I replaced the sensor that was bad on the very first trouble call. It's like, well, we started with that and that didn't fix it. It's like, well, then you guys didn't do it right because I replaced that sensor with one of the musical chair sensors that you guys already had and it fixed the ride. So don't get too involved. If you're already good at troubleshooting, don't get too involved with what other people tell you because if you want to take that information, take it with a really big grain of salt. Because chances are, since they didn't get it running, it's not right. Now, this was my policy that I developed after a good 10 years of working at the park already. So it's like I already had a lot of knowledge built up and stuff like that, but there were plenty of things where I just didn't trust the people that were making this, oh, I arrived at this decision. And I say, okay. And even if they stood there with me, I say, I arrived at this decision because this, and that. I'm like, okay, I would just go ahead and recheck those things that they were saying. Did I really dig into it deep? No, because they said they just did that. So I'm just going to pull out like a voltmeter and I'm just going to check for my sanity just to make sure that they did the right thing. And this is where people get mad. I already checked that. I'm like, I'm just checking it again, and I would just go through and check that. It's like, okay. Finding a messed up, I found 2 fuses blown to a 3-phase motor, which was kind of hard. It was throwing us for a loop because when you looked at the leg to ground voltage, I had the proper voltage on all 3 legs, coming into the fuses and going out of the fuses, because the one leg that was still good was backfeeding through the rest of the motor onto the other 2 legs because the motor was bad. So it was a 480 motor. So I had leg to ground, coming into the fuse block, 277, 277, 277, going out, 277, 277, 277. It looked like those fuses were good. Had no problem whatsoever, It looks like they're good. But, and even when you take your multimeter and go across it, it was 0, 0, and 0. So it was like, okay, because it was backfeeding. But again, remember what I said about taking the fuses out? Took the fuses out, ohmed them, ohmed out good. Next fuse, blown. Next fuse, blown. Now with the fuses removed, leg to ground. Good. Other two, shorted to ground. Next one, shorted to ground. It's like, yep, motor's bad. We're going to have to replace that one. So learning on the fly pretty much just boils down to asking why, trying to find out what the machine was doing and then what it needs to do. So why, what it was doing, what it needs to do. And then the big one is these little things, especially if you don't understand them, find something small and ask somebody who does understand it what is going on and have them explain it to you. And don't do the thing like a lot of us did in school where the teacher says, "Do you understand that?" And a lot of us just sit there and went, "Uh-huh." When in our heads it was like, I have no clue what this person's talking about. They were doing something and like, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention at all. Don't do that. Go to somebody, ask them, and if they tell you the explanation, even if they don't ask you if you understand it, if you don't understand what they explain to you, ask for them to explain it again. Say, okay, this is what it is. And you just go, I didn't understand that. Can you explain that again? Now, to a lot of people, that may seem annoying. That may seem like you're going to annoy somebody. But I have way more respect for somebody where I explain something and they say, I don't understand. Okay, I explain it again. I still don't understand. So it would cause me to sit there and think, like, how would I explain this a different way? And I would change how I explained it. Again, different analogy. It's like, what about this? And then that person would understand. It's like, that person, I hold them up on level 10. They are way up in my book because they knew enough to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. The other people that I hold down really low is when I say, do you understand? And they go, uh-huh. And in their head, they're like, I have no clue what this guy is talking about. I'm wasting their time. They're wasting my time. I would much rather just say, hey, let's do this again. Let's talk about this again. I don't understand. It's like, well, let's explain it a different way. It won't be a problem. All right, I think I've talked long enough about this subject. Kind of an odd one, but again, these scenarios, these things can help out pretty much all over everything you do on pretty much any walk of life. You could figure that you can use these in your job or even, your personal life, whatever you're doing. Just keep asking why. Keep trying to find out what it is and learn those little basics. If you don't understand the wiring, go find some wiring diagrams to something that you know. Something that you know. Don't start with trying to wire a computer up. Start with a basic light bulb and a light switch. This is what I know. If you're going to mess with wiring, use DC voltage like a battery. Don't play with wall voltage. All right. If you like the video, let me know. Drop a comment down below. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. If you want to email me, ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com, you can go ahead and email me. If you're a park looking to troubleshoot a ride, you guys already know how to get a hold of me. All right. Stay off the air gates. Bye.